just in addition to the presentation of Kamel, a short reminder that Jordan mission, we put it in the perspective of the Syrian crisis. Just few figures. Today we have more than 200,000 people who died due to this crisis. 7 million people displaced within Syria. 4 million refugees in the region, with a few countries, including Jordan mission, the Jordan country. And in Jordan itself, we have more than 200,000 refugees. ICF started in Syria, but 2 years ago decided to extend our response to the Syrian crisis with the Jordan mission and the Iraq mission as well. Today we are based in Jordan with a program in Irbid, in host communities with refugees and host communities population. We are addressing through WASH, mental health and food security and livelihood projects. And as I said and mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we are also working now on an additional project. We will be working with maybe UNICEF in Ashraf camp, refugees camp.
Well, my presentation will be divided in 3 main parts. And I will just make first on Jordan in its regional context. And then I will make a focus more on the question of Jordan as a host state for many different refugee flows, just to give you the historical perspective on this aspect. And then on the third point, I will just focus more on the current conflict in the region and the prospects, some elements on prospects for the future. Well, just to present myself, I'm a geographer, and I was working on international migration issues linked to refugees in the region since the middle of the 90s, and I worked in Lebanon on the Palestinian refugee issues and mainly the camps in South Lebanon. And then I was based in the French Institute for the Near East in Damascus between 2006 and 2010, working on the Iraqi refugee crisis and the arrival of a lot of urban refugees, and it was one of the aspects that I developed in the article, in the book mentioned previously. And then now I'm currently based in Jordan, a country which I know since '96, and I was based there in 2001, 2002, and I came back due to the Syrian refugee crisis. Well, my personal field of interest is comparing refugee situation and refugees in host society. The differences between the two different aspects. And currently I have 2 projects. One is based in Zaatari refugee camps. We are working on accommodation issues and the way refugees use the different shelters given by the international community, and how they reuse it to build new houses, and how in a very constrained area. And the second thing I'm working on is much more linked to the issue of economic development inside the camp. Well, just to back to my presentation. Well, Jordan is it's not a very famous country. I mean, nobody knows exactly what is happening inside Jordan. It's quite famous for its archaeological site and so on. But what is happening in Jordan, the construction, the building of the state, with what is now the current Jordanian state today, is not very known and famous. Jordan is a rather new country. For those who are working in South America or in Asia or in other parts of the world, it's a rather new country. It was independent in 1946 only. And well, the country was not such a country previously. It was a region of the Ottoman Empire. And what was the characteristic of this space was that it was at the crossroad of the different countries between the Arabic Peninsula and between what is so-called the Levant, at its time Lebanon and Syria. It was part of a big region that was called Bilad al-Sham, or others call it Great Syria. Its main function was that it was on the road to the pilgrimage. So the state developed, and the different cities in the states developed mainly in the late 90s with the railroad was created between Turkey, Syria, Palestine, and the Arabic Peninsula. The population until the 1920 was very, very low. It was around 225,000 inhabitants for the overall country. Half of them were considered as Bedouin in the south, and half of them were more or less peasants in the north, with very, very small cities. The composition of the population is very interesting because it has developed after the Palestinian-Israeli war in 1948 and the arrival of a lot of Palestinian refugees, but I will be back on this issue a little bit later. Now we can consider that, well, demographers have worked on this aspect, but now we can think that probably nearly half or a little bit less of the Jordanian citizens are from Palestinian origin. So it means that nearly half of the population is from a refugee background. And this is extremely important to understand the current reaction of the Jordanian state to a new migration flows. This Palestinian population is extremely concentrated in the capital area, Amman, Zarqa, Roubeix, that is the northern part of the state. And you can see it's just on the northern part, close to the Syrian border. We can imagine that around 70% of the population in this area is from Palestinian background. So Trans-Jordanian, the original inhabitants of the Jordan Kingdom, are a minority in the capital city. Well, another aspect of who are the Jordanians, its specificity in the region. The minorities are very, very low. It's not like in Syria, like in Lebanon, where minorities are extremely important. In Jordan, we have an overall Sunni Arab population, with very few exceptions of non-Arabs, such as Cherkess, Chechen, and Armenians. They are 1-2% of the overall population. Even if they play a great role, especially the Cherkess population in the army and in the state, but they are a very, very small community. And we have very few, well, the Jordanian authorities say 4% of Christians. In fact, it's less due to emigration. But, well, the population is homogeneous. That is a specificity in the region. It's not the case in Syria. It's not the case in Lebanon or in Iraq. Regarding this homogeneous population, the kingdom and the king himself has a very interesting position concerning interfaith dialogue. I mean, despite the fact that the country is overall Sunni Muslim, the kingdom presents himself and has different programs of interfaith dialogue. That is extremely important if we look now at the conflicts in the region that are some of in which the religious dimension is very prominent. In terms of politics, as I told you, nearly half of the population are refugees. So it's an extremely high percentage. The social contract was built after the creation of the state in 1949, was extremely clear. Palestinians, despite the fact that they are refugees and still considered as refugees by Jordan, have been given the citizenship. And this is a unique case in the Arab region. All over the different Arab countries, Palestinians are stateless except in Jordan, where they have been given the citizenship. They are Jordanian citizens. And so this is one hand. with a little few exceptions of Palestinians from Gaza, but it's very few, low numbers. And on the other hand, the king himself guarantees the right of return of the refugees in case of a permanent settlement of the solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So there is kind of, you are citizens, but you are still refugees. So the citizenship is given to them as a temporary basis. It's like that when you will be able to return to your country of origin, in terms expressing in political terms, of course, then you will be able to do it. So the state himself has been built on a deal with a large refugee community. And so this will have deep impact on the way Jordan will treat the refugee question today with the Syrians and a few years ago with the Iraqi crisis. So just to give you a few elements on the different refugee crises in Jordan. This map is a map on the Palestinians in Jordan and in the overall region, just to give you the idea that now nearly half of the registered Palestinian refugees in the region lives in Jordan. So we have about 4.5 million registered Palestinian refugees in the region. A little bit more than 2 million are currently living and registered in Jordan. They came in three waves. The first wave was in 1948 when the Israeli state was created. About 100,000 Palestinians came to the east bank of Jordan. And the other part came to the west bank that was annexed by the Jordanians. Then in 1967, Six-Day War, Israeli state occupied the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights, and 350,000 Palestinian refugees have been expelled. And so they arrived in Jordan, and new camps have been created. And in 91, with the Iraqi occupation of the Kuwait, 300,000 Palestinians came and left Kuwait and arrived in Jordan. So the overall arrival of Palestinians in Jordan now, it made that it's more than 2.5 to 3 million of Palestinians that are currently living in Jordan. And due to the occupation and the restriction of mobility in Israel for the Palestinians, Jordan is now the only point of exit for international point of exit for Palestinians. A Palestinian who wants to go to Egypt, who wants to go to another country, has to go through Jordan. So Jordan is an important transit country also for Palestinians today, and is the only international border for them. So this is the first layer of refugees. Beginning with the first American and coalition war on Iraq in '91, a lot of Iraqis fled and left Iraq, and a lot of them went to Jordan. These figures are only for the post-2003 war, because it's very difficult to have figures between '91 and 2003, but we can, well, probably think that between 1 and 1.5 millions of Iraqi transited or resided in Jordan since '91 to nowadays. And we know that with the development that I will talk a little bit later in the presentation, what is happening in northern Iraq with the Islamic State organization, Daesh, is now bringing new refugee movements from northern Iraq towards Jordan. Well, the policy of Jordan at this time was very clear. It was a policy that was called by a very interesting French researcher, Géraldine Chatelard, that called it incentive to transit. I mean, everything was done to keep the border open on one hand, well, Iraqis were able to enter more or less with some restrictions to Jordan. And on the other hand, everything was done for them that they have to leave the country. They cannot stay and reside in the country. So Jordan has a very selective policy and tried to maintain the richer, the investors, some of the prominent political leaders from Iraq, mainly on the Sunni Muslim side, to reside in Jordan, but all the others were pushed to go in a third country. One of the policy that was done by Jordan, it was very interesting, that it gave a kind of passport to Iraqis investors, those who are wealthy and have money, and they had a Jordanian passport of 2 years without having citizenship. So they were able to travel, because with an Iraqi citizenship it's very hard to travel and to have visas all around the world, as you may all know. But so they developed a kind of, well, a special permit, a special passport for this population. What was interesting in terms of with the Iraqi crisis, and when it's one of the main differences with the Syrian one that I will just talk about now, is that the Iraqis were mainly from urban origin. Urban, educated, and more or less wealthy people. And those who came in Jordan specifically were the more educated, the richest one. The other went to Syria. And people in Syria were urban, but with a lower social background. And currently we have the Syrian crisis. The Syrian crisis began concerning Jordan more or less in 2012. At the beginning there was not so much people leaving the country. And currently we can say that probably, if we look at the UNHCR figures, we have 600,000 Syrian registered at the UNHCR. The issue of numbers, we can go back during the question if you want, but it's a very sensitive issue in Jordan specifically. What we just know is that the Ministry of Interior said that, well, around 80,000 Syrians came back in Syria. But some of them say that a lot of them are not registered. So they say that it can be up to 1.5 billion, that at my opinion it's absolutely not relevant as a figure. What is interesting, if we compare the different three ways of refugees, is the policy adopted to settle the refugees in the country. On the Palestinian side, the policy was a camp policy. So we say that Palestinians should be kept in camp, should be put in camp. And they created camp in 1948 and later, and in 1967 and later. So there was a lot of refugee camp, more than 20 refugee camps in the country to accommodate these refugees, despite the fact that only 20% of the Palestinians are still living now in refugee camps. But the camp policy was there to show that the international community that the problem of refugees, of Palestinian refugees, was not solved, and that they had to be a kind of, well, showing the international community. It's a kind of image that had to be transmitted to the international community. The camp policy was stopped, and you know that in 1970 there was Black September in Jordan. The Palestinians, some part of the Palestinians, made a kind of insurrection inside Jordan. It was a very harsh Jordanian response to this situation, to this, and the Jordanians say that, well, no more camps. The camps, they had been perceived as a place where it was not possible to control the population. It was a place where refugees could get more weapons, could be politically structured inside the camp, and the Jordanians said no more camps in the country, because camps was linked in the Jordanian thought, as it was now currently in Lebanon also, a place of political mobilization against the regime, and a place of instability. So there was, say that, no more camps in the country. And the other aspect of the camp policy that has been stopped in Jordan, it's because they say that if we open camps, then people will stay. So one of the aspects for structuring the Iraqi crisis was, as I mentioned, incentive to transit. We don't give them any place where to reside, where they can recreate a kind of social or normal life in exile, and where they can gather and probably stay. So, no camp policy. With the arrival of the Syrians, at the beginning there was a non-camp policy also, because, as I mentioned, the perception was if we open camps, then the people will stay. The people will reorganize in exile. So the Jordanian state didn't want any kind of this problem, especially because the southern part of Syria was the place where the revolution began. A lot of fighters. As you can see on the map, the boundary is very, very long with a lot of desert areas, so very difficult to control. And so there are possibilities of mobility of Syrian fighters between South Syria and northern Jordan. So a non-camp policy. And they decided to reopen a camp, and I will go back just a little bit later at the end of this presentation to give you some more details on how it was decided to open a camp, and what are now the consequences of the camp policy in the region. What is something that I will just talk about also a little bit later, but just to give you an idea. Jordan is also a country where a lot of other immigrants are present, and we have around 250,000 Arab immigrants working mainly in the agriculture and the construction sector, and we have around 80,000 non-Arab, mainly Asian domestic workers. So it's a large population. When you think that the Jordanian population is 6.5 million, it's a very, very large proportion of immigrants in the countries. So I will just go now a little bit more in details on what is not very famous or known about Jordan, because Jordan is always presented as a place of stability in the region. That is the case currently, and it has been the case since a few decades. But it has also different internal challenges, and this is not very famous. And the Syrian crisis now is very correlated to much more internal problems or challenges inside the Jordanian state. Well, this is a map on poverty. Poverty in Jordan. As you see, the poverty is much more developed. The racial poverty is much more developed in the southern part, that is mainly Trans-Jordan Bedouin areas. But in absolute numbers, the numbers are very high in the northern part. So where the poorest, the vast majority of the poor live in the northern part of Jordan. And if you compare it to this map, then you can see that, because of course this is here you have no refugee. It's just an administrative division that makes it, because it's desert, there is nothing. So most of the refugees live here, in this part, and if you compare it now to the place where you have poverty, it's all in the poverty pockets. So it's extremely important to know that the refugees live in the places where you have a more poor, where you have the poorest Jordanian population. All this, it's just to give you an idea of the problems that the Jordanian state can face with the arrival of a huge number of refugees in a very short period. The current, today, there are different forms of division inside the Jordanian society. I think that one of the most common one is between Transjordanians and Palestinians. That is one of the main things that, well, I told you half of the population were Palestinians. And there is a campaign since the beginning of the 2000s since now more than 10 years, of promoting Transjordan identity. So all what is coming from abroad is a little bit suspect for the Jordanian state today. The second big division in the country is the huge difference between Amman and its metropolis and the rest of the country in terms of development of services, especially. Another one that was linked to these two first maps is the difference between rich and poor in the country. That is not a very famous, the social problem in Jordan are huge, and in the poorest area in the southern part here, you have a lot of uprising since the mid-80s. You have a lot of tribal uprising. So it's very unstable in the south. So not only the northern part of the country is where it's linked to the Syrian conflict, but the southern part of the country is extremely unstable, and have a lot of investments of the state to try to counter this uprising in the southern part of Jordan. So, kind of social division of the country: poor, rich, Palestinians, Transjordanians, urban and rural Jordan. Now we have a country that is 80% urban, so the rural population is very low in the country, and we have other political opposition in the country also. You have three dimensions of the opposition now in Jordan. You have a very small leftist pan-Arab political parties, but it's more historical. You have the Islamic Front that are the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and you have a small Transjordanian national movement. And it's interesting because the forms of opposition to the state, to the government, is deeply linked to the way they will deal with the refugee communities. Because, for example, the Transjordanian movement will be very opposed to the arrival and will promote to close the borders, whereas the Islamic Front will have a huge NGO network to help all the different kinds of refugees, whatever is their nationality or social background. And this is a completely different approach between the different opposition movement. And now the Islamic Front has a very efficient NGO network that is partly used by the UNHCR on the ground to reach the most vulnerable Syrians. And this is very important because the country is not, united, and there is not a single approach to the refugee issue. Some of them have a pan-Arab or Islamic way of treating the question and have a more regional perspective, and some of the other are much more based on a Transjordanian acceptance of the citizenship, contesting that every kind of ways of refugee and even Palestinians should no longer be citizens of the Jordanian state, even if it's only a minority, but it's still existing. Well, to go now to the challenges, you can see that what we can see that Jordan is one of the only country without any kind of problems, or has no gas, no oil, currently no conflict, stable, and it's more or less the only country in the region with this characteristic. So, on what the stability of this country relies mainly on two pillars, on two aspects. The first one is much more an internal aspect that I will just develop, and a foreign link to foreign relations at the regional level. If we go to the internal aspect, why the country is so stable in an environment so conflict with. Well, the regime itself, and especially the king, has promoted the cooptation of elites in its own regime. Each time a new refugee waves arrives, the government and the regime has tried to co-opt some of the elites to ensure the stability. It was the case for the Palestinians during Black September. Some of the generals in the army were Palestinians. So, I mean, very prominent families from the West Bank made allegiance to the Jordanian regime. And it has always tried to promote this incorporation of elites. With the Iraqi crisis, it has promoted the incorporation of members of the parliament, investors, and trying to give them some advantages and to give them some kind of stability in the country in order to co-opt them, in order for them to support the regime. And this is the main, and it was named to the what I mentioned in the beginning, in the social contract in 1949, when the king decided to give the citizenship, but to preserve the right of return. And it has tried since the beginning, since the creation of the state, this state has been able to co-opt foreign elites in its own power organization. And this is extremely important. It's what explains partly the stability of the state. Also, stability rely on external sources of economic aid and investor, and this is completely linked to the refugee issue. Jordan opened its border, but it has also a lot of it benefit from a lot of foreign economic aid and foreign investments. And the king and the government has tried to promote this aspect. We are a country where a lot of refugees are coming, so we need assistance from abroad. These Jordanian foreign relations are vital to the domestic stability because they take the money from abroad and then they redistribute it inside with these programs linked to host community refugees issue, for example, with also direct foreign aid from the United States, from the Saudi Arabia, and from different forms of cooperation with Britain, with France, with a lot of. So they say that, well, we can bring you stability and security, but we have to have some kind of assistance from abroad to bring it inside the country and promote stability inside the country. But this has some kind of problems or questions that I will now raise. It's that this stability relies on the capacity to co-opt new elites, and this, in terms now, it is not absolutely sure that Jordan will be able to co-opt Syrian elites, even if you have a very old Syrian community that is based in Jordan, but it's not, I mean, often easy, and which will be the way they can integrate them in a very unstable environment. This is not, it's quite complicated. The fact that they are able to capture external sources of economic aid and redistribute it inside the country depends on their capacity to bring money inside. And so the country is extremely dependent on foreign aid, both economically and military. So this is one, it can be a good point, but it can be also a point of weakness if the alliances and the different regional environment evolves. There is a fear also of the risk of the development of Islamism in the country, and especially in the south part of Jordan, that is quite important. And the relation with Syrian jihadi is problematic for the country, and the country is is trying to promote a non-jihadi version of Islam, but it's quite difficult when you see, especially these poverty pockets in the south of Jordan. And, well, just to conclude on this part, it's, Jordanian uses foreign policy as a tool for internal security. It's now the case. But its position in the region, being pro-US, pro-Saudi Arabia, can be problematic in the region. It depends on how everything will evolve, but it can be now security, but it can lead to much more problematic problems. I mean, for example, the Jordanians have made a peace treaty in 1994, with Israel, but the vast majority of the population is against this diplomatic agreement because it didn't give any rights to the Palestinians, no Palestinian state, no possibility to move. So, I mean, it's something that can be sometimes stability, but sometimes it's, on the other hand, it can bring problems inside the country. Well, and I don't know. I received some of the questions that probably were sent to me and I will just put 3 or 4 minutes to try to give some elements on the questions that have been asked. I tried to give an overall framework of how Jordan is now positioned in the region. Well, some of the questions were linked to the regional spillover and the problem of which are the actors and so on. So, well, this map is the map of the Islamic State organization, or Daesh, where it is located. I think that, well, I'm absolutely not a specialist of jihadi movements or Islamic State or any kind of this. Well, we can just probably say that Daesh is not a kind of, I mean, now speaking, I mean, today, it's not a problem for Jordan on its own territory. I think that the risk of terrorist attacks is quite important in Jordan, but the risk that the Islamic State would develop in Jordan seems to be very low today, because they would have to secure their own position in the northern part of Syria and in the northern part of Iraq. And I think that Jordan is not the next step. It seems to be quite hard for them, and the Jordanian army is very careful on this aspect. The role of the diplomatic role of Jordan in the crisis, I think that they have good contact, but it's a limited diplomatic role. They have an interfaith dialogue. They promote this, so probably they can play a role. It's a rather small country, and I'm not sure that they will have the possibility to play an important role in the crisis. Well, another question was linked to was the refugee integration successful, and what are the challenges for Jordan? Well, I think that it has been partly successful, and it's linked more to internal or local aspects of the integration in Jordan, because all this northern part of Jordan and the southern part of Syria are linked since decades with tribal links, family links, and so the arrival of refugees has been more considered by a lot of the local population in the northern part of Jordan as something that was normal. But if it, in the case of a protracted conflict, things can change, of course. But we can go back to this aspect during the questions. And one aspect that I want to raise, probably because it's a part of a project that we are now building with the team, with the research team in Jordan, is and in Lebanon and Turkey, is something that is not studied at all. I mean, normally we study the refugees and the host communities, but very few elements on the other immigrants in the region and the previous Syrian population that was located in northern Jordan or in Lebanon previously. And the first one that has problems, that has faced a lot of socio-economic problems with the arrival of the Syrian refugees are the Egyptian workers in the northern part of Jordan. That is absolutely not documented and they work on the same socioeconomic sectors. They are poor, vulnerable. The other one is the previous Syrian refugees, previous Syrian migrants that became refugees with the crisis. And there was a kind of important population in the northern part of Jordan and hundreds of thousands in Lebanon, and probably something that would articulate and would integrate this migrant population in the host country would be very interesting to try to develop. We are trying to make to build a research program on this specific issue. Well, I'm not a specialist of international relation, and I would be very careful about giving any prospects of. I mean, I was living in Syria until August 2010, and I couldn't even imagine that the regime would fall. Would not fall, because it's not still in place, but would have such a huge revolution. It's very difficult. But I think that some elements. I think that most of the refugees and most of the Syrians in northern Jordan, they escape war, so they don't want to create a new war. I mean, that's one of the first aspects that it's very important to. And some of them were ex-fighters, but they do not want to fight here in Jordan. Because Jordan is the only place where they can, even their family can be safe. So I think that there is not a will or any kind of perception that they would bring war there, because it would be against their own interests, I think. A second element is that Jordanian army, I mean, Jordan, if you compare the ratio of number of soldiers and population, is one of the highest in the world, with Israel, North Korea, and so on. So the army is very, very, very present. And the Jordanian army, compared to the Lebanese one or some part of the Syrian one, is very well trained. It's training foreign Arab army in Jordan. So they are very, very well trained, and they have a lot of military relation with France, United States, Britain. You have a lot of families who already have intermarriages with Syria. When talking to a lot of people in Irbil, in Mafraq, in Zaatari camp, and outside, and even in Amman, a lot of them were already working or coming for short periods because they were, for example, coming to pick up fruits or work. So there are a lot of long time tradition of living together. So they are not completely perceived as a foreign population. They are perceived as foreigners with a lot of previous links with Jordan. So actually, I didn't mention some of the economic aspects of elements, but I can just give a brief elements on this. I mean, if you take it on a macroeconomic level, it's a benefit for Jordan. I mean, they have benefited from a lot of investments from Syrians. It was the case in the 70s already, when a lot of Syrians came to Lebanon or to Jordan, for example, to invest. A lot of small shops have been opened. There have been some studies done in Mafraq. It's 180 shops that have been opened by Syrians. So Mafraq, that I know since a long time, because when I was crossing from Damascus to Amman, I was living in Jordan. We go through Mafraq, and the highway just go. And Mafraq is, I mean, a place where there's nothing, more or less. And now it's a quite developed area. There's a lot of commercial activities that were absolutely not existing before the arrival of the Syrians. And the Syrians have also increased the internal demand on goods, products. So on an overall perception, it's positive. the arrival of Syrians. It's not negative. It was the case of the Iraqis in Syria, exactly the same thing. But what is the problem is on certain segments of the job market, you have problems with the lower classes in Jordan and with the prices of renting prices for accommodation. These are the two main problems for the poorest Jordanians and the poorest immigrants that face a lot of problems because the prices rose up. But I mean, for example, I just met an interview a few weeks ago with a Syrian worker who was working in Mafraq since 10 years. And he was working for a Jordanian, of course, in Mafraq, and he was earning 200 JDs, 240 euros per month. And he was renting for something like 80 JDs his apartment. Since the arrival of the Syrian refugees, his income has been divided by 2. So for the same work at the same place with the same employer, now he's earning only 100 JD, and he has to pay 100 JD his apartment. So he had to leave the apartment and go inside the camp. So I mean that Jordanians benefit a lot because it's a skilled, very cheap manpower, and they can also benefit from renting prices. So the landowners they benefit from the arrivals, the employers benefit from that. But of course the lowest category of Jordanians, the poor workers, renting small housing in the northern part of Jordan, they have problems. But still it's, the overall perception is that it benefits more than it costs. Even if it puts a lot of pressure on schools and so on. But this has a lot of international assistance to improve the capacity of the schools. But I don't think that there will be, but nobody can read, of course, the future, but I don't see a lot of problems or tensions rising. In certain categories of the population, yes, but on the overall situation, I don't think so. This is a very hard question. Well, I think that the camp is not a good solution at any time. I mean, putting people in camps, it's not a solution for the people themselves. Except in a very specific emergency cases where we have no other solution to accommodate huge numbers of new arrivals. But I mean camps has some advantages. I mean, refugees don't pay for accommodation, they don't pay for water, they don't pay for electricity when they have electricity. That's one of the main problems in Doraï camp, for example. They can recreate some kind of local forms of solidarity between themselves, so they can reorganize. When the camp is like in Zaatari, when the people in Zaatari, they can move inside the camp. So when you arrive in Zaatari, you can go wherever you want. You are not put in a specific place. In Azraq camp, it's a completely different situation. In Azraq camp, you have to go to where you are allocated. You cannot move. I mean, the shelters are put in the soil. You cannot move them. In Zaatari, you can take what they call the caravan, and you can take it and put it wherever you want. In Azraq, it's not possible. It has been already put. So it can help people to reorganize. But one of the main problems in the camp, and this is perceived by the refugees as such, is that they are put in a system of humanitarian governance, and they are completely dependent. And this is absolutely not acceptable for Syrians, and it was not acceptable for Iraqis, for the Palestinians, or for everybody. It's not specificity to the Syrians, of course. But I mean, people, they do not accept to wait for the money to get food. I mean, they prefer to work and earn the money to get food. I mean, they don't want to stay at home. And the camp is a very a place where people are disciplined. I mean, for example, since now 1 year and a half, they have to obtain a permit to go out of the camp. So they cannot go out of the camp. They are completely like in an open jail. So they have to obtain a permit to go out and to get in. They can also have relations with their relatives outside. It's very complicated, very hard. They have a specific, relation I was discussing this with Pia, but with the relation with some of the NGOs. For example, NGOs, some of the NGOs, they forbid to their staff to walk in the camp. They have to go by car from a place to another. So they have absolutely no relation with the refugees outside of the compounds. I didn't put some photos of Zaatari, but when you see the humanitarian compounds, it's much more like, they call it, for example, the schools of the UNICEF, one of the compounds of the UNICEF, the refugees, they call it when they pass in front of it, they call it Guantanamo because it looks like a jail, not a school. So what is happening in the host community is a much more mixed, a normal life for the refugees. Inside the camps, it's a very specific, people, they get bored, they cannot do anything. They cannot move, they cannot work, so it's a depressive environment. Even if in terms of probably practical organization, it's easier. And in fact, inside the camp, people, except for, and I'm SAF, so it's interesting to say this, except for food. They have these coupons. They have, it depends on the price. The amount of the coupons is always evolving according to how much money the World Food WFP have money. But for example, the coupons, they have, for example, let's say that it's 24 JDs per person. So they have a credit card, and so they can spend this money in specific, they call it malls, like in big cities. So they have to spend it in specific malls. And until October, there was two big malls, like American Spinez and TSC, or I don't know, open on the edge of the camp. And the camp is a city, so it's very far to go. And there are no buses or anything inside. And there was a lot of small shops that were accredited by the WFP. And in October, they decided to close all the shops run by the Syrians, and just to leave open two malls for a city of 88,000 inhabitants. So the people were just waiting, for example, 2, 3, 4 hours to get in the mall. And if you don't spend your money in 1 month, then you lose your money. You lose it directly. So you cannot reuse it on another month. And they cannot spend it outside the camp because it's not allowed, and then they cannot go outside the camp, in fact. So they were completely, they just feel that they have been completely disciplined, and that everything that was created and developed by the Syrians inside the camp to promote internal local economy was completely destroyed by what they perceive as an international administrative machine that is completely disconnected from their own needs and own way of consuming, because most of them come from south of Syria, so they are not used to go to malls and they go to small shops with good relation with the. So it's something that was extremely problematic for the Syrian refugees inside the camp. This question of opening or not the malls, who owns the malls, who runs them, how can we spend the money, and how should we spend all this money in a lot of problems with the bread issues. Inside the camp, the bread was included. So you have to spend 4 JDs per person per month in bread. Outside the camp, it was not the case. So inside the camp, you have to have this. For the families of 10 persons, it was impossible to eat 40 JDs of bread. So they said, well, we would need these 2 or 3 JDs to spend it for other goods